It actually creates like hamster in a wheel situation where people just run like hamsters in a wheel, but the faster you run, the sooner you're actually going to die.
Welcome to The Way Change Works, the podcast from the Association of Change Management Professionals. I'm your host, Greg Voeller. Our show features global leaders telling stories about creating lasting and meaningful change in organizations, communities, and lives. These stories reflect our belief at ACMP that beyond the technology, processes, and structures that are key elements in our profession, true change is only possible through the positive transformation of human beliefs and behavior. In this episode, I'm talking with Radka Dohnalová, the founder and CEO of ATAIRU, a leading purpose-driven international leadership development company based in the Czech Republic. She identifies three main challenges faced by leadership teams as they navigate change today. 1, the inability to create clarity. 2, the need to manage resistance. And 3, the requirement to create true capacity for change. Radka shares her approach to overcoming these challenges with a multitude of tools and strategies, including ego-free leadership, black sheep insights, and the practice of leveraging clarity to drive certainty. We also dive into the critical components of fulfillment, both professional and personal, as Radka shares her research and insights about talent, passion, and purpose.
My background actually is in finance and in business, but I always wanted to do things where I can make a difference. So even though I studied finance, I went to work for the UN, and I worked for the United Nations World Food Program, and then for McKinsey, a consulting company. And when I was actually doing my MBA at Harvard, this is where the turning point from the business side to more of a leadership development side started, because I was always very much passionate about working with people. And when I took my time during the MBA, I went through this personal journey of really digging deeper into what are my talents, my passions, my purpose. And through this discovery process, it became clear to me that it should be much more in the area where I can be focused on people. And I started to do research in the domain of leadership. So for me, and really my purpose is about bringing sort of game setting, educational programs that are focused on leadership that are going to make an impact for a wide range of people.
Give us just a sense too, that as that passion was ignited for you, Radka, and that focus on education and bringing that stronger capability. Can you just summarize for us then a little bit as you entered into that? What were some of the early learnings that you were seeing? What were some of the early opportunities that from your research that you wanted to really start and start to build some focus and capability on?
So for me, actually, the first part that I started to focus on, and I call it authentic leadership, has been really into how can we not only train leaders in skills or competencies, but how can we actually tap into what drives them, and how can they leverage it for their authenticity and effectiveness and fulfillment. So I think that was the first piece. And then the second area that we focus on, which is adaptive leadership, which has been focused on, okay, what are some of the capabilities that we need to have for leaders and organizations to be future ready. And so I think these are the two elements that I am passionate about, that we've been developing content in, and that we've been basically working with leaders here.
That's awesome. Awesome. All right. So I want to dig in a little bit to this notion about fulfillment, because I actually believe that in today's time where we're such squarely in an employee first era, that professional fulfillment and personal fulfillment are more important than ever. And so help us understand, Radka, what are some of the key components around fulfillment that you've seen?
So the first one is really around our talent, or you can talk about preferences as well, but actually understanding, and there are different tools that people can use, whether it's, if people are more extroverted, introverted. But I found this tool called Talent Dynamics, for example, which I found really practical, which was around how can people discover their talents based on their preferences, but how can they also collaborate more effectively and design roles around them. So I think that's one thing, because one of the mistakes I've seen people making is, for example, you have someone in sales, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I have situations where you had someone who is responsible for sales or very senior sales executives, and their role and the core of the job is the focus on people, right? Sort of motivating the sales force, working with people, etc. Now, I've had a case where I had a super successful guy who has been doing sales for 15 plus years, and he was suddenly promoted, and he was promoted to a regional sales director. Now, the regional sales director, that the core of that job is completely different than the core of the previous job. Now, the core of this job is actually managing numbers and sales results of regional of the countries within the region. It's not that people focus, because you basically speak with the sort of local chief sales officers, and it's much more about sort of performance dialogues than motivation, right? It's sort of, why are you not delivering on this number, or what could you do to deliver more, etc. Now, this guy actually, after half a year, he was burnt out, and they fired him because he didn't do that good of a job. Now, this person, not only was he super stressed during this period, but he definitely was not fulfilled, and he actually even had sort of confidence issues afterwards, because when you are being let go of such a senior job, then sort of it does affect you, right? So, and if you really think about it, the core of that is that he was not using his talent, right? So that's one of the deepest motivator. And to me, the difference between talent and skills is that we can all learn skills, right? But the talent is, the skills are either aligned with our talent or not. And if they are not, it just takes much more energy, effort, everything. And we are not then, of course, that happy about it as well. So I think that's the first motivator. The second motivator that we really work with, and which is challenging to address, is sort of our limiting patterns and belief system, because the limiting patterns and when we work with women, this is linked a lot with fears. With men, it goes more into the ego area, if you want. But that's the second part that we are actually looking into it, because many times when we go from the context of fear, and it could be, I want to prove something, and I'm doing certain choices in my life to either prove that I'm competent enough or that I can earn money, etc. It actually creates this like hamster in a wheel situation, where people just run like hamsters in a wheel, but the faster you run, the sooner you're actually going to die, And I think shifting from this context, from the fear, and actually much more moving and operating from the context of talent, passion, and purpose is important. Now, this is important. So if I take again the situation of this guy, right? He wanted that promotion because that's a natural path that you have, when you want to move up. But and it would be more challenging to, for example, say, look, I don't want to go this direction. I want to go a different direction because it's a non-standard path. So actually shifting and understanding, where are my talents, and then making choices that are coming from that. That's the second important piece that is there with regards to the fulfillment. And then the third one is around passion and purpose, which is much more where this is more fluid or flexible throughout our lives. And it's something that we, in my opinion, make more choices of how we want to do things so that they are actually energizing us and that they make us fulfilled. So these would be sort of three things that I would say with regards to the fulfillment.
That's awesome. So Radka, as we were preparing for our discussion here, you and I talked about three sort of areas of mistakes or opportunities that you're seeing that leaders are making when it comes to change. And I'd like to go through those right now and have you share your perspective with our audience.
So yes, Greg, we are seeing three mistakes that leaders are making. The first one is their inability to create clarity what that change is and being able to link it to the overall strategy of the company, because you have leaders on different levels within the organization, and being able to say what's the change that we are making either within our department and how is it actually linked to the overall strategy or the overall change or direction or purpose of a company. I think that's super important, and we don't see enough of that. Number two is the struggles and inability to deal with resistance that is coming whenever we are changing something. And then the third is the actual capacity for change, because many times we are seeing people who are saying, look, I like the change, I want to do it, I just don't have enough time, energy, or resources to actually be able to do that. So these are the three things that we are seeing.
And so how do you work with a leader and or a leadership team just around those opportunities? And Radka, maybe share please an example of where you've had to dive in when you've seen a leadership team demonstrate those challenges, and how do you lift them up? I'd love to learn more about that.
Mm-hmm. So with regards to the first challenge, which is how can you create clarity and how can you actually link it to the overall strategy, we've been working with this company, which is one of the largest publishing houses in the region. They have received a large investment to basically be able to shift from being the sort of publisher that focuses on print to be able to shift more into being a digital publisher. Okay. And so they've received this large investment of money. They launched around 130 transformational projects in different areas of the publishing house. And we've been working with them to support that process, but also they've identified a group of 80 people that actually have been the key leaders who've been delivering this change, besides having their normal job, which they've had. Okay. And I think one of the key challenges that we had was that at one point, I think it was about 1 year in, when they were all motivated, they were bought into the change and everything, I seemed to go pretty well. We've had that situation where we've been actually doing with them a monthly retrospective. So every month we brought the whole group together for 1 hour and we were asking two questions. What's your energy level? So it was the first one to sort of understand where they are, energy, excitement. And then the second question was, what are the biggest drivers supporting the change and what are the biggest blocks or blockaders of the change, if you want. And basically the key theme that has been coming up was we are chasing too many rabbits, and people just said, look, it's too many things. We're not clear on the priorities. We saw this vision, which was very high level, but we then have this everyday reality of the 130 projects that we are doing with, and it's just too many things. We don't know what to prioritize, etc. So what we've been working with them on is designing, and we call it a strategic one-pager. Okay, and a strategic one-pager for us is be able to say where is the company heading, but actually be able to link it to the everyday projects, right? Because many times we see that company have this high level vision of where they are heading, But then the everyday reality, there's a disconnect. So we said we needed to create this one strategic one pager for a company, and then for every one of the core teams or projects. So they are able to see how do they link to that.
Just tell us, what impact is that having on the people there? You mentioned there were 80 energized folks here ready to drive this right from the get-go. How has this restored energy to the people in that organization?
Mm-hmm. Clarity is super important because clarity drives certainty, right? And so when people are clear, they are also certain they are working on the right thing. And when you as a leader can create that clarity and certainty, then you are also clear that people know how do they need to make the decision, and you are certain that you are going in the same direction. The next level that we also brought in, which was important, we started sort of creating not to-do lists, right? Because as new activities are created, you need to also create a process for actually killing projects or killing activities. And I think based on the strategic one pager, you're basically making the criteria explicit on what do you say yes to, what do you prioritize. But then also the mistake we are seeing that leaders are making is that either they prioritize or deprioritize, but it's very hard to kill things. So we've been actually then working with them on killing some of the projects. And when they were able to kill them and having this clarity and being able to create more capacity at the same time, had much more, people were much more calmer, if you want, less exhausted, because I think they understood that this is a sort of several year journey and that they actually now have the energy to be able to do that. And you had much more alignment, which is important among teams, because that clarity on what are the must-win battles for us overall really helped. So I think that would be the key things.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about that inability to really deal with resistance. And I think, we as change professionals, we fully recognize that resistance is a very natural human condition in any change activity. So how are you helping leaders really think about that, how to understand resistance and what to do about that?
When we are addressing it, there are several layers on how to address it. And I'd like to just focus now on one, which is creating psychological safety. Okay, because I think psychological safety is super important for resistance. And one of the key mistakes that we are seeing is that people in general don't like resistance, and they don't like dealing with resistance. So I think the first thing is actually being able to expect resistance and being able to generate it and then turning it around into something constructive, right? So I think that would be the first step. And we've been working with this one company. It's an FMCG company that was the number one player in the region, and they wanted to change, but because it was actually it's a beer company, and they have this culture of being nice to each other, right? Because it's sort of when people drink beer, they are in a good mood, etc. And they wanted to generate new ideas, because whenever there was resistance, the resistance has always been very sort of subtle, right? People didn't say anything publicly, and then they just never had the buy-in for things. They were never then truly committed, and things did not really go through. And none of the previous change initiatives really worked. So they said, look, we want to do something different, and we really want to focus on how can we bring the resistance sort of to the surface, and how can we make it more explicit. So they created this thing which they called a black sheep concept. We have this thing that if someone is a black sheep, that it's actually really negative. And they said, look, we want to create a positive black sheep. So they said, look, we want to empower people to sort of don't be afraid and come up with challenges, ideas into the meeting. So what they did is they created, it started during COVID, which is interesting. So they for meetings, and they started to do that on an exco level, and then they basically cascaded it into the company. So they said, look, there will be always someone at the meeting who will be sort of playing the role of a black sheep. That person, when on a Zoom call or Teams call, had the background with the black sheep, which was actually interesting, because that basically said, look, it's okay if I challenge. It's okay that if I challenge, and that gave people the encouragement to say, and they sort of made fun of it, or not fun of it, but they sort of were using these things such as like, can I now have a black sheep ask a black sheep question, right? Or can I now have a black sheep challenge for you? And basically at the end of every meeting, they had this rating: was there enough of constructive challenge within that meeting? So that's something that they did, and it has been something that culturally, especially here in this region, worked really well, because what we are seeing with psychological safety is that people in general, they, if there is not a culture of that, they don't feel encouraged to speak up, to challenge. And this concept sort of helped them, because then, if I play the role, or if I can have this explicit signaling word, can I ask a black sheep question, or can I have a black sheep comment, that actually helps. But then also it on the receiver end, because many times we see that managers are then discouraging this initiative, or when people are challenging in the way they respond. Now, if then you sort of give it this explicit signal, can I ask a black sheep question, then that manager sort of listens from or with another context, right? Because it's sort of, they don't want to threaten or anything, they just want to really maybe challenge the way we do. And it then generated also different managerial response. So I think that was a nice example on how a lot of the resistance was basically made explicit and then turned into problem solving.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful example. Thank you for sharing that. So let's go into this notion about capacity to change. And again, you mentioned in your earlier example of where in the search for clarity, the organization had 130 different priorities. And when I heard that, Radka, I was thinking, how does any organization wrap their collective head around something like that, from this true capacity aspect? Because we as humans, we are making choices all the time about what we choose to change or how we choose to change with all of that. So go deeper, help us understand a little bit more about your perspective and examples around a capacity to change. Love to hear more.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the key thing, and I already briefly touched on it, that we started to do when working with clients is working on creating this not to do culture, because we are seeing that as we are moving into a more unpredictable, more faster world, we need to generate more ideas. Now, more ideas generate more activities. Now, unless you, with the same speed and commitment, kill some of the existing ones, you are going to have a capacity issue. Okay. Now, when we started to work with this sort of not to do concept and focusing on what matters really, we realized that people really struggle with sort of killing projects, ideas, activities. And the first thing that we started to do is actually understand, why is that? What are some of the reasons why people find it so challenging? And even I personally find it very challenging to kill things. And we've identified basically 6 things that are the biggest blocks, which are internal blocks that we have that block us from killing things. The first one is basically sort of, I've been used to do things in a certain way, and it saves me time and energy, because in a way I don't have to think about it, right? So I just drive to school, or I do certain things in a certain way because that's just how I do it. And when it's on an automatic level, there is a sort of energy saving element to that. Okay. The second piece, which is actually super interesting, is that there is an emotional connection, right? So sometimes I've invested a lot, like I've been working on this ATAIRU Leadership TV project for almost 2 years, right? And if I were to kill it, it just would have, it would be very difficult for me because I love it, right? There's an emotional attachment. Or what we are seeing is if you work with someone, so imagine I work with you, Greg, and we are really good colleagues, friends, etc. I am your boss. Now, you have emotional attachment to any other project, to any of the projects you have. Now, I might find it difficult to kill it because I know you like it, and I like you. Mm-hmm. So the third is actually that people, we call it that there is a loss without having an immediate replacement, and it could be loss of revenue, volume, profit, etc. So when you kill something, you're not going to have a replacement immediately. The next thing which we are actually seeing people are making a mistake is that they are, you take something out of priorities, but you still consider it a business hygiene. So it actually never disappears, right? So people say, this is not priority, but you need it for running the business. And then the next one is that people find it really difficult to kill something because they are not the owners or they cannot make a decision, right? And the last thing is actually a sort of loss of or fear of losing value for the company. So for example, we've had this with this FMCG client that I was telling you about. So they actually, again, they had 140 strategic projects as well. They went down to kill it to 70. But out of the 60 that they killed, actually 20 were not implemented, or they were not, the execution of the killing, if you want, was not done because people just didn't want it, because they felt, look, if I kill it, what will I lose my job or not? What will happen, right? And the reason, these top 6 reasons that I just mentioned actually are super important in the process, because we understood that the first thing that we are doing is actually identifying, what are the things that people want to kill. But then as a next step, we ask, okay, what are some of the things that you are afraid you might be losing, or how do these blocks actually block you in executing it? So for example, if it was the ATAIRU Leadership TV and for some reason it maybe would not be the best thing and we would need to kill it, right? For me, I would identify the emotional attachment, right? I would also identify the thing that, for example, we might not have a replacement for it because at this moment it's generating some revenue, some profitability, and that might be challenging to do. And the last thing would be a certain loss of my own value because I've been basically the one who has been driving it. Now, if you identify this, that can, and make it explicit, make an explicit discussion about that, then you can actually help people through that process, right? Because then you can say, okay, if these are the top 3 blocks that you Radka have, then okay, what can we do to address it? So then actually the not to do activity can happen much more smoothly. So I think that's one of the key things that we've been doing. And we learned, because unless you invest in understanding what are these blocks for every person for some of the key initiatives and address them, the execution is then really not going to happen.
To learn more about the work of Radka and her team at ATAIRU, check out their website at ATAIRU.com or their profiles on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And to learn more about the Association of Change Management Professionals, especially our membership benefits, professional development offerings, and certification program, go to acmpglobal.org. Now, if you're not yet a subscriber to The Way Change Works, please add us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And be sure to tell your friends about us as well. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for leading how change works.